Hello and welcome back. Continuing the theme of Bridgewater and the sea, we've already seen how the town of Bridgewater spent an awful lot of effort trying to tame the river over the centuries. Well, this time we're going to venture out into the Bristol Channel, or the Severn Sea as it was also known, and explore the perils and opportunities for a Bridgewater man out on the waves. And I want to focus on one incident and its consequences to highlight this. This incident took part in the earlier part of the 19th century, and our return for the mariner's life in the later part of the century another time. The core of the story was researched by Hilary Sheridan, and if you'd like to know more, a full article appeared in the Greenwood Tree, Journal of the Somerset and Dorset Family History Society, which appeared in February 2015. So let us start. The core thing to keep in the back of your mind is to remember that before the motorways and powerful trucks, the easiest way to move anything bulky around was by water. So trade in Bridgewater depended on shipping, and little vessels zipped back and forth along the coastline of the country and on the continent, picking up things here and dropping them off there, and then larger ones would go overseas and transport things there. So on the morning of Tuesday the 15th of March 1836, one of these routine picking things up and dropping things off tasks was underway. 5 ships, called Trows, and here are an example, all of which were laden with coal, the Margaret, the Neptune, the Moss Rose, the Fame and the Betsy, were all at the quayside in Cardiff and were due to sail to Bridgewater. The weather was unpleasant and choppy, but it was thought fine enough to sail. Setting out early, it would only take a few hours to reach the mouth of the Parrett at Burnham on Sea, and in fact they would be at Burnham by about lunchtime. However, the weather got increasingly worse as the day wore on, and a terrific gale arose, becoming an utterly deadly storm by noon. On a calm day, it's tricky enough getting into the Parrett, there being one precise channel between the Gore Sand in the north and the Steart Flats in the south, and ships caught on those can become stranded and capsize, and many wrecks took place there over the centuries. By noon that day, the 5 ships were approaching Burnham, but the Margaret was the first to suffer. Witnesses noticed she was in distress off the Gore and soon grounded on the shallow sands, becoming stuck fast and relentlessly battered by the crashing waves. There was a crew of 4 on board. Following on behind was the Fame, which was still on course and soon passed by the floundering Margaret. The captain of the Fame, Charles Hunt, yelled to 2 of his men to go onto the ship's rowing boat to attempt a rescue. However, the storm was too strong against the power of only 2 men, and they were quickly driven back, their rowing boat fast filling with water, and they lost an oar in the process. The Fame managed to rescue them at least, and then headed back to Burnham. The Margaret, however, was battered by the waves and utterly overwhelmed. At 6 in the evening, the body of her captain was washed ashore. In his pockets were a watch, which had stopped working at 1:30 that day, a few coins, and some papers. The bodies of the 3 other men were found 3 days later. Sadly, I haven't been able to find the name of the captain and his 3 men. The Fame, meanwhile, and the Betsy, both battered by the weather, managed to limp into Burnham. The Neptune, meanwhile, was blown completely off course towards Uphill, where, although it was wrecked, the crew at least were rescued and found safety. Meanwhile, back at Burnham, the Moss Rose had floundered like the Margaret, and was likewise grounded on the sands of the Gore, and was being thrashed by the waves in a gale. The ship's boy attempted to throw himself onto a piece of debris nearby, hoping to get washed ashore, but he quickly drowned, and his body was discovered 3 days later. The 3 other men of the crew, Captain William Davidge, John Thomas, and John Michael, despite the howling wind, pelting rain, and the soaking wet wood, managed to climb the tangled rigging and hung on for dear life. The desperate men could be seen from Burnham, but the seas were too rough to send anyone out to help them, and they needed to wait for low tide, which would come only at midnight, many hours away. Now imagine the most miserable time you've ever been caught out in the rain and soaked to the bone. Now imagine feeling that while also clinging desperately for your life. And now imagine doing that for hours on end, waiting for either rescue or death. When night came, it was decided to send out the Fame's little rowing boat again to attempt a rescue, and this time with 5 men instead of just 2, who should have enough power behind them to face the waves. They will be led by Captain Hunt. Frederick Rees and David Davies of the Fame followed their captain, while 2 further brave volunteers, James Sharman and Frederick Coombs, made up the numbers. In the dead of night, with tumultuous seas and just their own brute force and a lamp against a raging torrent, they set out. The 3 survivors of the Moss Rose had clung on for dear life for 12 hours now. 2 of the 3 were strong enough to get aboard the little ship once it had finally arrived, and then finally Captain Davidge was found, now sat on the deck of the sunk ship, lapped around by 2 or 3 feet of water, who was too weak to move by himself but was hauled into the little boat, and the rescuers then rowed back to Burnham and finally to safety. In recognition of their bravery, the 5 men were rewarded handsomely via a public transcription for their brave and selfless action that night. More importantly, inspired by the action, Sir Peregrine Ackland offered to pay for a lifeboat for Burnham, and further subscriptions allowed for the construction of a lifeboat house by 1840, and this would be the foundation of the RNLI in Burnham-on-Sea. The individuals who lost their lives saw the absolute perils of life at sea. Captain Charles Hunt's life thereafter, however, shows some of the opportunities. He had been born in 1810 to James Hunt, an innkeeper of the Ship-aground Inn in Eastover, Bridgwater, and Jane (née Stevens). The Ship-aground was demolished in 1961 and stood where Oxfam does today, and unsurprisingly the inn was a very popular destination for mariners, and this would have been how Charles was introduced to the sea. When the incident of 1836 happened, Charles was only 26 and was already a master mariner, so evidently a man of some talents. The money he was given in reward for his brave and selfless actions that day he put to good use. He used it to set himself up as a ship owner and ship broker. By 1840 he owned a share in the ship the Fame, which he had captained that day, and he soon built a little empire which included a handful of little ships, and he even commissioned new ships to be built in Bridgwater's little shipyards. The Fame, for example, was wrecked in November 1866, so a second Fame was built the following year. And the second Fame sort of survives today, as it is built into the riverbank just above Dumble, and I hope it's still there. I've not found any evidence to say otherwise. And there are a few corpses of a few Bridgwater-built vessels sunk into the mud along the river. Hopefully they can be preserved one day. In 1840, Charles married Sarah Ann Colclough, and they set up home in Valletta Place, a delightful row of buildings by the river, which were usually home to mariners. Charles died in 1892, a prosperous man, and his son carried on the business. Charles was remembered in the local press as a well-respected and genial member of the community. His wife Sarah Ann was buried with him in 1897. Captain Charles Hunt was buried in the Wendon Road Cemetery. Sadly, when the Friends of the Cemetery formed in 2010, his and Anne's memorial had been toppled and smashed into 2. At the start of this talk I mentioned Hilary Sheridan, who had researched and uncovered Charles's story. She was determined that Charles and Sarah Ann be popularly remembered, so paid for the repair of the memorial, which was no mean task. The talents of fine memorials of Bridgwater thus came to the fore, and they had to take the memorial away and pin the 2 parts together, and cleaned it before bringing it back to the cemetery to re-erect it on a new foundation, with the repaired curbstones. They had cleaned the marble, and the finished job is absolutely splendid, the join on the 2 broken pieces looking like a wisp of the marble. The Friends of the Cemetery then arranged chippings from Cannington Quarry, which completed the conservation of the memorial. Now I'll return next week with more stories to continue the theme of Bridgwater and the sea. I shall pause here for a quick moment to mention the wonderful work being done by the Friends volunteers within the cemetery, and here are a few pictures of some of the work which has been carried out recently. You can support the Friends by volunteering to help out, by becoming a member on our new Work in Progress website, link below. You can like this video, subscribe to this channel, you can like us on Facebook, or you can buy one of our books. All of these activities help us quite a lot. So see you next time, and in the meantime, wishing you all the very best.